Have you ever imagined walking into a small-town diner and being told you're not welcome? That's exactly what happened to J.D. Vance on one unforgettable night in Springfield, Ohio. But the real shock? Instead of storming out or fighting back, he chose a path that left everyone speechless. He sat down, asked a question, and transformed the tension in ways nobody expected. In the next few minutes, you're going to witness the power of genuine conversation, even in a place brimming with distrust. Curious about how JD's story ends? I promise it's worth sticking around until the final seconds. But before we dive into this remarkable event, let me remind you of one thing. If you love stories that challenge perspectives and bring hidden lessons to life, this is your moment. We have tons of narratives just like this, each designed to make you think twice about everyday encounters. Ready to start? Great. Just one favor. Hit that subscribe button now and help us reach our 1,000 subscriber milestone. Every single subscriber makes a real difference, and we can't wait to keep sharing more powerful moments with you. It was a brisk early evening when J.D. Vance, drained from a marathon of meetings, interviews, and policy discussions, drove his dusty SUV into the heart of Springfield, Ohio. With barely enough energy to tap the steering wheel, he yearned for a simple, hearty meal, something unpretentious and comforting. After asking around, he was pointed to a roadside joint called Owen's Café. A flickering neon sign welcomed passers-by from the main road, though calling it welcoming might have been optimistic. The outside paint had peeled away in patches, and the lone street lamp in front buzzed audibly, fighting the encroaching darkness. Yet, locals raved about Owen's Café's home-style burgers, fresh-cut fries, and unfiltered coffee that could jolt a hibernating bear awake. Still, J.D.'s shoulders felt heavy. He'd spent the entire day speaking at local events, a meet and greet with constituents, a quick radio spot, a talk at community center about economic policies. Most of them either politely skeptical or openly frustrated. The last thing on his mind was another confrontation. He just wanted dinner, quiet, and maybe a few minutes to himself. Pushing open the door, he expected the usual small-town diner vibe. Warm lighting, the hum of conversation, and the reassuring sizzle of a grill. He got the sizzle and the hum, sure, but there was something else too, a swirl of tension so thick it felt like stepping into a showdown. As soon as he entered, a handful of heads turned in unison. Conversations hushed. Some recognized him right away, but their expressions weren't exactly friendly. J.D. wasn't new to tense environments. He was used to sharp debates and complicated political negotiations. Yet, there was an unspoken friction here that made the hairs on his arms stand upright. He felt singled out, as if the entire place pulsed with the thought, "What's he doing here?" At the entrance stood Mary, a young waitress whose tired eyes were offset by a determined set to her jaw. She had a notepad tucked in her apron and was in the middle of greeting him until recognition flashed across her face. Her welcome to Owen's Café died in her throat, replaced by a taut silence. J.D. gave her a polite smile, shoulders slumping from exhaustion, but still holding himself respectfully. "Hey there," he said, voice softened from the day's fatigue. "I heard you guys do a mean cheeseburger. Mind if I grab a seat?" Mary blinked, flicking her gaze over his shoulder as if searching for backup. After a tense pause, she stammered, 1 second. Then she shot behind the faded, swinging door into the kitchen. In that tiny window of waiting, J.D. noticed the decor. The dusty pictures of families pinned to a bulletin board, yellowed newspaper clippings about old community fairs, a chalkboard menu boasting homemade meatloaf on Tuesdays. Everything suggested this was the kind of place that had deep local roots, the kind that valued tradition, regulars, and close-knit bonds, the kind of place where outsiders, especially those with political spotlight, might not be immediately embraced. He also noticed the customers. An older man at the counter wore a weather blue work jacket, collar frayed from years of daily use. His expression was guarded, suspicious. Meanwhile, in a booth near the window, a younger man in his 30s leaned back, arms crossed and an amused smirk on his lips, as though anticipating some drama about to unfold. A couple in a corner booth tried to keep to themselves, but couldn't help glancing over. When Mary returned, the silence in the diner seemed to magnify. She cleared her throat, looked J.D. in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't serve you." No mention of being short-staffed, no mention of running out of food. Just a flat refusal. Confusion clouded JD's expression. "Why, if I may ask?" Mary glanced down at her shoes, then behind her toward the kitchen. "It's, the owner. He'd rather we didn't." The older man at the counter pretended not to listen, but his shoulders tensed. The younger man in the booth let out a low chuckle. JD exhaled through his nose, processing the swirl of emotions. Disappointment, frustration, and a hint of sadness that this was happening over a simple meal. But instead of snapping or turning away, he asked quietly, "Could I speak with him?" "Listen, if you find the situation intriguing and want to hear how it escalates, and more importantly, how it gets resolved, make sure you subscribe to our channel right now. We're edging ever closer to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. Don't forget to drop a like if you believe in the power of open dialogue. Now, let's see what happens when JD insists on staying." The clatter of a kitchen door rumbled again, and out walked Don, the owner. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a stained apron wrapped around his waist and flour dust smudged across the front. He looked like a man who had been in the restaurant business for decades, tired yet resolute. Don's eyes flickered over JD with a mixture of recognition and wariness. "I hear you want a word," he said, crossing his arms. JD nodded, striving to keep his voice even. "I do. I'd like to know why I'm not welcome. If I've done something personally, I'd like to hear it." A flicker of discomfort passed over Don's face, as if he didn't love this confrontation, but felt cornered into it. He cleared his throat, speaking low enough that only JD and a few nearby customers could hear. "Look, a lot of us around here aren't exactly fans of politicians, especially ones who talk about helping rural folks, but never come back after the cameras are off." He shifted his weight. "I run a business. My customers see you walk in, they might get upset. Tensions could rise. I don't want to fight in my diner." JD listened carefully. He'd expected hostility, but there was something else in Don's tone. Exhaustion, perhaps. The exhaustion of a community that felt overlooked too many times. "I understand that," JD replied, "but I also just want a meal. I'm not here with reporters or a camera crew. It's just me, my car out front, and an appetite." Don pressed his lips together, clearly torn. Then he glanced over at the older man in the jacket, who seemed to be minding his own business, but had obviously heard every word. Next, Don's gaze landed on the younger man in the booth, who arched his eyebrows as if egging him on to throw JD out. Finally, Don let out a stiff sigh. "You have a point, but people in this town feel hurt. They see your face on TV. They think about broken promises. And if I seat you, that might look like I'm endorsing you or something." JD glanced around, noting how the other customers pretended not to stare. "I can respect your concerns. But if you don't mind, maybe we can talk a bit. If, after that, you still don't want me here, I'll leave. No scene, no fuss." Without waiting for Don's approval, JD pulled out a chair at an empty table. The scraping sound on the tiled floor seemed to amplify in the hush. He sat, hands folded, posture calm. It was so deliberate, so unaggressive, that even Don hesitated before barking back. A short laugh burst from the younger man in the booth. He ran a hand through his hair, a smirk on his face. "Wow, this is a first. Most would have just left or threatened to sue. Not sure if you're bold or just plain stubborn." JD offered a wry half-smile. "Maybe both." Don watched this exchange in silence. After a beat, he exhaled, walked over, and sat across from JD, still keeping his arms crossed, though. Mary hovered uncertainly near the counter, her eyes flicking from Don to JD, unsure if she should intervene. The older man at the counter tapped his fork against his plate, glancing occasionally at the unfolding scene. He looked like he had a story or two to tell, but was reluctant to speak up. "All right," Don said at last, "I'll give you a few minutes, but I can't promise anything. And if I see tempers rising, I'll have to ask you to go." JD nodded. "That's fair. We're at a critical juncture here. Folks," JD Vance, sitting in a diner that doesn't want him, the owner begrudgingly offering a chance to talk, and tensions about to bubble over. "If you want to see how this plays out, Hit that subscribe button now. Help us reach our 1,000 subscriber goal, and stay tuned for stories that challenge assumptions and inspire new perspectives. Let's continue. Don's voice came out measured, but the strain was evident. He began, "We've had so many folks come through here. Politicians, business people, even big celebrities passing through for photo ops. They promise growth. They promise help. They promise to care. Then they disappear. Factories close. People lose jobs. Families pack up and leave. The only thing left behind are sound bites on the evening news." JD absorbed each word, his expression turning thoughtful. "I know it must be frustrating, feeling forgotten." The younger man in the booth leaned forward. "Frustrating? That's mild. It's infuriating. My dad worked 30 years at a plant that shut down 3 months after some senator said help was on the way. Help never came. Politicians don't live with the consequences of broken promises. We do." A hush fell, as if the entire diner was momentarily reliving the pain of vanished industries and unfulfilled pledges. JD nodded sympathetically. "I get it, and I've seen similar things growing up. Broken towns, folks out of work, cynicism everywhere." He paused. "But that doesn't make me your enemy by default." Don drummed his fingers on the table, his posture still rigid. "Maybe not, but can you blame us if we're skeptical? You come in here, recognized from TV, and we don't know if you're looking for a headline, if you're going to spin this into a stunt." JD spread his hands. "I understand. I'm not looking for a stunt. Believe me, if I wanted press, I'd show up with cameras. I didn't. All I wanted tonight was some dinner and maybe a little peace before driving on." A brief silence followed, broken only by the faint clinking of utensils from the other customers. Mary shifted on her feet, unable to fully focus on her tasks, since the entire diner's attention was pinned on this conversation. The older man at the counter finally spoke, voice low but steady. "We've been let down time and time again. You're hearing it from Don, from that young fella in the booth. We're not trying to be nasty. We're just tired." JD turned, meeting the man's gaze. "I hear you, and I'm sorry it's been so rough." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Don, shoulders visibly sagging, gestured to Mary. "You know what? Get the man a coffee." Mary blinked, then nodded, grateful for the directive. She poured a fresh cup from the pot behind the counter, walked over, and set it gently in front of JD. He thanked her, took a sip, and instantly grimaced a little, though he tried to hide it. The coffee was strong enough to jolt the weary. That small, almost comical reaction chipped away the tension, leading to a faint grin from Don. The younger man in the booth watched, but refrained from mocking JD this time. Now that JD had a foot in the door or a seat at the table, the conversation deepened. Don explained how his father had opened Owen's Café back in the 1960s, during a more prosperous time when factories hummed and Springfield thrived. Over the decades, the café saw families grow up, kids go off to college, and more recently, entire families uproot in search of work elsewhere. The older man at the counter, whose name was eventually revealed to be Hank, shared how he was once a supervisor at a local manufacturing plant. For years, he put in 12-hour shifts, believing in the promise that his company would stay if the local government offered enough incentives. But deals fell through, and he found himself jobless at 58 years old. Too young to retire, too old to start a new career easily. The younger man, Troy, spoke of his father, who had poured his life into that same plant. When layoffs came, he was given a severance that barely paid the mortgage for a couple of months. Troy's father ended up with health problems and no steady insurance. The resentment Troy felt toward political types ran deep, and that scorn was directed squarely at JD as soon as he recognized him. JD listened, occasionally asking questions or nodding in acknowledgement. He didn't try to defend every politician out there, nor did he dismiss their pain. He simply let them speak, meeting their eyes, giving them the courtesy of genuine attention. Mary, silently refilling coffees and clearing dishes from other tables, started to see that JD wasn't pushing an agenda. He was just present. She found herself softening as well. After all, rarely did any visitor, let alone a well-known public figure, sit and truly listen without deflecting or taking offense. Gradually, the tension in the diner ebbed away. It didn't vanish completely. Scars like those of struggling community run deep. But there was a sense that J.D. wasn't the villain they had imagined. Don could have demanded J.D. leave at any point. But now the owner was conflicted. On the one hand, he worried about how regular customers might react. Would they say he was selling out or being played if he served J.D.? On the other hand, he saw that J.D. genuinely cared enough to engage in conversation, even if it meant enduring cold stares and frank stories of disappointment. Finally, Don let out a long breath. He looked at Mary, who hovered near the grill window. She caught his eye, lifted her eyebrows in a silent question. "Do I take his order or not?" Don gave a subtle nod. Turning back to J.D., he said, "All right, you want a meal, you can have it. Just understand, this doesn't mean we trust you. It means you've shown enough respect to sit here and listen." J.D. nodded earnestly. "That's all I can ask for. Thank you." Hank, at the counter, mumbled something under his breath that sounded like grudging approval. Troy slumped back in his booth, arms still folded, but the open hostility in his gaze had cooled to mere skepticism. Did you notice how that single decision, staying to talk, began to shift perspectives? If you value the power of empathy and real conversation, we'd love your support. Subscribe to our channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Share this video with friends who might need a reminder that listening can bridge even the widest gaps. Mary brought J.D. a menu, though he joked he wouldn't need it if they had a good old-fashioned cheeseburger with fries. She jotted down the order, glancing at him with a half-smile that seemed to say, "I'm still not sure about you, but I'm curious." She couldn't help but notice how the rest of the diner was leaning in. Nobody was truly minding their own business at this point. Don retreated to the kitchen and personally cooked the burger, layering onions and tomatoes carefully, as if testing whether J.D. would appreciate the local flavor. The distant hiss of the grill filled the diner, a comforting background sound that somehow eased everyone's mood. When the plate arrived, J.D. inhaled deeply. "Smells fantastic," he said. He took a bite, nodded with genuine pleasure, and gave a quick thumbs up to Don through the kitchen window. Don, wiping his hands on a towel, acknowledged it with a gruff nod. Hank turned slightly on his stool. "Good enough for you, Senator?" he asked, voice laced with a hint of teasing. J.D. chuckled. "More than good enough. And please, just call me J.D. Hank grunted, but there was a faint smile hidden under his white mustache. Troy, from his booth, muttered, "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable." Even so, he was no longer sporting that triumphant grin from earlier. It seemed the act of sharing a burger under the same roof had dialed down the tension to a simmer instead of a boiling point. Amid the clinking of forks and the low hum of conversation that resumed, J.D. paused to reflect. The refusal he'd experienced wasn't born out of mere rudeness or random prejudice. It was anchored in real pain, real losses, and the feeling of being forgotten by those with power. In his line of work, J.D. was no stranger to confrontations. But this was different. Stripped of media lights, press releases, and partisan lines, it laid bare the genuine frustration people felt. Small towns across America share similar stories of shuttered factories, disappearing jobs, and the intangible heartbreak of broken promises. Springfield, Ohio, was no exception, and Owen's Café was a microcosm of that wounded pride. By simply refusing to leave, by taking a seat, J.D. had opened a door that might have otherwise stayed locked. Mary, meanwhile, noticed a subtle shift in J.D.'s demeanor. He wasn't lecturing them on political theories or preaching solutions. He was acknowledging their hurt, validating their experiences. In a world so often divided by polarizing views, that gesture alone carried weight. By the time J.D. was halfway through his burger, Hank surprised everyone by swiveling his stool to face J.D. more directly. He set his coffee mug down and tapped his calloused fingers on the counter, gathering courage. "I've been around here a long time," he began, voice shaky but filled with conviction. "I voted for Republicans, Democrats, and everything in between. I've lived through expansions and recessions. But the worst part is watching my neighbors pack up U-Hauls because the factory they counted on closed without warning." He rubbed his forehead, as though the memory alone weighed a ton. "I got kids, grandkids. They're scattered now, Georgia, Texas, even out west. Springfield used to be a place folks stayed in, built lives in. Now it's just quiet. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Hank's words hung in the air. J.D. swallowed the last bite of his burger and leaned in, elbows resting on the table. "I'm sorry you've had to see your home change like that," he said. Hank's lips thinned. "I appreciate that. But let me be clear. I don't want sympathy. I want honesty. If you say you'll fight for places like this, I want to see it happen. Like, really happen. Not a campaign slogan or a handshake at the county fair." J.D. nodded slowly. "Honesty is fair. I can't fix everything overnight, Hank, but I can promise you that I know what it's like to feel out of options, to see your community crumble. I grew up in a working-class family myself. That experience shaped who I am. And yes, I do want to fight for these places, Springfield included." There was a glimmer in Hank's eyes, equal parts hope and lingering doubt. He didn't respond immediately, but gave a firm nod, as if accepting J.D.'s words of the moment without fully trusting them. The diner's air felt slightly lighter, as though a few invisible walls had come down. Troy, the younger man in the booth, cleared his throat. He still looked guarded, arms crossed over his chest. "Words are easy, J.D. We've heard 'em all before. No offense, but people in suits always come around, talking about how they get us, then vanish when the next election cycle rolls around." J.D. turned to him, offering an understanding nod. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. All I can do tonight is show you I'm here to listen. Maybe it's not enough, but it's a start." Troy shrugged. "I guess. But if we let our guard down, it's on us when we get burned." A faint awkwardness hung in the air. J.D. didn't fire back with defensive rhetoric. He just said, "That's how it's been, I know. I can't erase that history, but I can try to do better, step by step." Mary discreetly brought over a slice of pie, on the house apparently, and set it near J.D.'s now empty plate. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. She offered a slight smile, mumbling, "We serve this to everyone who needs a bit of sweetness. Consider it a courtesy from the kitchen." Her gesture, though small, spoke volumes. The diner was warming to his presence, cautiously but undeniably. Can you feel the atmosphere changing? A moment ago, J.D. wasn't even allowed a seat. Now he's part of an honest dialogue with folks who initially wanted him gone. If that inspires you, don't forget to subscribe right now. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every click helps us keep sharing stories that prove how a single choice, like staying talk, can change everything. Minutes trickled by. The older couple in the corner booth relaxed back into quiet conversation. Mary continued to serve the occasional new customer who arrived, though each new arrival raised an eyebrow at J.D., quickly realizing he was the center of some unusual dynamic. But since no arguments were unfolding, people merely settled in, intrigued by the fact that a public figure was calmly chatting with the locals. J.D., meanwhile, sipped his coffee, forced down the last bit of the potent brew, and occasionally stole glances at the decor on the walls. Photos of the café through the decades, pinned next to handwritten notes, or children's drawings that read, "Best fries in town." The place had soul. It was more than just a diner. It was a piece of Springfield's communal memory. Don eventually emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He stopped by J.D.'s table, gave a faint shrug, and said in a tone that was almost apologetic, "You know, it's not personal. It's just we're protective of what little we have left." J.D. responded gently, "I get it." That might have been the shortest exchange all evening, but it carried significant weight. Don's guarded posture had softened, if only by a fraction, and J.D.'s acceptance of that honest admission underscored that he wasn't there to attack or belittle anyone. Across America, and indeed around the world, there are countless diners, small businesses, and local communities that mirror Springfield's struggles. Promises come and go, leaders appear and vanish, and hope often takes the brunt of the disappointment. In that moment, J.D. Vance's willingness to be present without pushing political agenda or seeking a flashy news headline made a statement. Sometimes, people just want to be heard. They don't expect instant solutions. They want recognition of their plight and the sincerity to admit there's no quick fix. They yearn for someone to say, "I see you and I'm not turning my back." As the clock on the wall ticked closer to closing time, Don took a seat again. Hank paid his bill and lingered, coffee mug still in hand. Troy remained in his booth, arms no longer crossed, though he occasionally checked his phone. Mary wiped down a few empty tables, but her attention kept drifting to J.D.'s conversation. Don cleared his throat. So, Vance or J.D., what exactly are your intentions for places like ours? If you had the chance to make a difference, J.D. leaned forward, resting his palms on the table. To keep fighting for economic opportunities that reach communities like Springfield. I know that sounds like the same old story, but I genuinely believe in building from the ground up. Jobs, infrastructure, and education. It's not easy, but the more people understand the challenges here, the more pressure there is to address them. Don's gaze flicked around his beloved diner. The old photos, the faces that have become family over decades. Just do me one favor if you ever find yourself in a position of influence, he said. Remember nights like this. Remember that the folks in places like Springfield can't afford to be forgotten again. J.D. gave a solemn nod. I promise I'll carry this memory with me. Troy snorted, still harboring skepticism, but not outright hostility. Hank just murmured, We'll hold you to it, son. With that, the conversation reached a quiet crescendo. Nobody was hugging, singing kumbaya, or chanting slogans. But there was an unspoken understanding in the air. A small step had been made, a tiny crack in the wall of cynicism that had built up over years. Eventually, J.D.'s plate was empty, and Mary came by to clear it. He asked for the check, but Don shook his head. No charge. Consider a thank you for not treating us like a nuisance when we push back. J.D. tried to argue, pulling out his wallet, but Don held firm. Hank offered a faint grin, finishing his coffee. Just pay it forward. Next time you see folks in need, remember we gave you a free meal. The younger man, Troy, stood up to leave, paused for a moment, then said, I'm still not sure about you, but thanks for hearing us out. It sounded more genuine than J.D. expected. J.D. rose from his seat, picking up his coat. I appreciate you letting me stay and talk. It might not change everything overnight, but maybe it's a start. Don extended a hand, reluctantly, but sincerely. J.D. shook it, feeling the man's callous grip. You take care, Don said simply. No grand gestures, no illusions of fully bridging political divides. Yet there was something honest in that handshake that neither would forget soon. So, what do we take away from J.D. Vance's evening at Owen's Café? First and foremost, we see the power of staying instead of walking away. When confronted with hostility or skepticism, our instinct might be to defend ourselves and exit the scene. But J.D.'s choice to remain planted, to ask questions rather than fling accusations, shifted the dynamic entirely. We also learn about the importance of empathy and listening. People in Springfield, like in many small towns, have every reason to feel overlooked. Their frustration comes from broken promises and seeing their livelihoods collapse. Acknowledging that truth without denial or deflection is a powerful gesture of respect. Lastly, we see that progress often starts with conversation. No, a single chat can't undo years of disappointment, but it can chip away at the resentment that builds up when people feel consistently ignored. Over time, those small cracks in the walls of cynicism can lead to real change if we keep returning to listen, to learn, and to act. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where you had to decide? Walk away or lean in and listen? Tell us in the comments below. Your insights might help someone else navigate a tough situation. And before you go, we'd love to keep sharing stories with you. Make sure to subscribe now if you haven't yet, so we can reach our 1,000 subscriber goal. By subscribing, you're not just increasing a number. You're joining a community that values deeper perspectives and meaningful dialogue. And hey, if you're hungry for more stories like this one, click the card popping up on your screen. It'll take you to our next video, where we dive into another real-life event that proves kindness and open-mindedness can show up where we least expect. Once again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.